used Jamaica as an example just now, and I see at the podium my good Jamaican friend. Over to you.
Thank you, Consul General. Prime Minister, my name is Marlon Hill. Like the Consul General said, I'm Jamaican descent, but I'm thankful to Barbados. Part of my legal studies here in the U.S. was at Cave Hill, courtesy of my law professor at Florida State University, the late Elwyn Griffith, who was also from Barbados. So I have two quick comments and a very specific question. First and foremost, let me just say that you are knocking it out the park. Cricket stadium, baseball stadium, whatever you call it, you're knocking it out. And you're really setting the bar, and we appreciate your leadership in many different ways, I can say. Second, quick comment, thank you for bringing this conversation to an academic institution like FIU. The students are here, and I'm sure they appreciate this conversation and your leadership. My very first, very specific question is, we have an election here, as you may know, in about a week and a half, and many people, all the U.S. citizens, raise your hand. U.S. citizens, raise your hand. Okay, maybe 60%. For the things that you can't say, or the ambassador can't say, or the Consul General can't say, when they speak to their congressperson or their U.S. senator, whoever that may be, the 2 U.S. senators, or if they maybe visit the White House, specifically, what do you need us to say on behalf of Barbados, the broader Caribbean region, that you can't say?
Thank you. How long you got? You know, at home I've taken to using some sayings to be able to let the penny drop, and sayings that we know from growing up. And I make the point, many hands make light work. And I thank you for that, because much of what the Caribbean needs in terms of its repositioning of its relationships with the North Atlantic countries in particular relates to having space, fiscal space, policy space, as well as opportunities for our people. Opportunities for investment, opportunities for employment, opportunities for training, etc. And much of us in the region felt for some time that since Ronald Reagan and 1980, post-80 with the Caribbean Basin Initiative, not much emphasis was placed on the region again going forward from a policy perspective. That is why I want to thank Congresswoman Maxine Waters for allowing us come into Barbados with 4 or 5 other congresswomen and congressmen earlier this year. And then the follow-up was the hearings on the correspondent banking, so that we could share our perspective. Because in many instances, we found that it's not even necessarily malice, but it's simply people don't appreciate or are not sensitive to our reality, because we are so small that they've not taken the time to be able to be sensitized. And that's why your comment as to persons continuing the conversation in our absence with your congresspeople, at your local level, at your state level, at your federal level is so important. Whether it is through those of you born in the Caribbean or through your children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, business colleagues, partners, church, people, whatever. We are facing one of the most difficult moments in the world with the climate crisis. And one of the reasons why the Caribbean remains highly indebted, and you may hear me talk a lot about the economy, it's not because I don't see people, because I try to put people and see, feel, and hear people in everything that we do. But we also know that it takes cash to care. And we also know that if I've got to go and spend, as is happening now in Barbados, 1.5% of GDP, 150 million roughly, on being able to recover from Hurricane Elsa and the freak storm, and the ashfall, another 80 million, then that's money that would otherwise have gone in to other things. And where are we spending it? We're spending it because the G20 countries of the world are responsible for 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions. And whether we like it or not, those countries that are responsible for it, and there's a difference between stock and flow, and I'm going to break it down, because the stock of greenhouse gases has literally come from the Industrial Revolution. Now, who built the Industrial Revolution? It's the blood, sweat, and tears of us and our brothers and sisters across the world, as developing countries as we are today, who were ex-colonies, that literally financed the Industrial Revolution. It is a crying shame that we are now facing double jeopardy, where that which we built is now also the cause of that which may cause some of us to lose our homes, or in some instances to lose some of our islands, depending on where you are in the Pacific or the Caribbean. Hence, the conversation for how we treat fairly and equitably two small island developing states, landlocked countries, developing countries between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn is now a strong and valid conversation. And that's why you hear us talking about it over and over. By the same token, you can't have everything being left out for our people in financing our way to net zero. The world came to us and said in 2016 with the Paris Agreement, oh, we'll put $100 billion together for all of you all for adaptation because you will have to adapt to living in a new environment. Well, years later, everybody's still waiting for that. And 100 million today is a lot less than 100 billion was 7 years ago. So that pressure on that front has to continue. Secondly, we've been fighting the battle, and I'm sure the CG will bring it around. We've launched something called the Bridgetown Initiative, working with NGOs, working with other like-minded governments, that simply says, look, we need long-term development capital. You can't finance development with 7-year money. Most of you in here can't build a house with 7-year money. If I ask you to go and get a mortgage and you get a 7-year mortgage, you can't afford it. But all of a sudden, if you had a 25-year mortgage, or a 20-year mortgage, or a 30-year mortgage, becomes a different story. And I use that just as an example, but you can't develop our countries in the way in which they want us to do, and we need space to do it. It's the same way when the WTO was formed, we said we need special and differential treatment for our farmers, for our manufacturers, because at the end of the day, we don't have any capacity to distort global trade in goods, because our share of global trade in goods is 0.000%. And our share in global trade in services is 0.0001%. So our capacity to distort is not there. But we don't listen to us. Nobody lobbied, nobody think for us. What is the reality? 30 years on, Barbados' agricultural sector declined by 22%, and Barbados' manufacturing sector declined by 34%, simply because we never got the world to recognize that we needed special and differential treatment. What has COVID and climate done shown us? That food security matters. If Hurricane Ian had taken out Miami instead of Western Florida, what would be happening to food supply all through the Caribbean chain now? Most Caribbean countries depend on a weekly ship bringing food. And that's why President Ali has been doing an excellent job in leading the effort of being able to do what we asked him to do to help us reduce our import bill by 2025, at least by 25%, but more now, given what we've seen with the pandemic. So we need to be able to have that policy space, because bet your dollar, this country supports its farmers in the Midwest, Europe supports its farmers, but we in the Caribbean don't get to support our farmers because we've been told that the WTO doesn't allow this or that or this or that or whatever. And that's one of the reasons why Barbados took up the presidency of UNCTAD and became the smallest country in the world to host an UNCTAD conference last year. Because UNCTAD is supposed to be the organization for trade and development for developing countries. And if we can't get the policy space that a man that growing vegetables in St. George, or St. Thomas is not only going to grow when there's a hurricane and there's a shortage of food coming in from outside. In order for him to have the capacity to supply food to us, he has to grow all year round, not true? If not, he doesn't have the systems, the working capital, or anything. So these are some of the things and the policy battles that we're fighting. And then from a labor perspective, I see Jackie here. Where's Jackie? So Jackie gone? Right. Who is working to be able to expand opportunities for us in terms of our workers, and Jamaica benefits, a lot of other countries benefit. At this time of adjustment for our countries coming out of the deep hole of COVID, and at the very time that the United States of America has a shortage of labor, who are the most natural people to supply that labor force, and who probably will not stay here but go back home? It's Caribbean people. One of the reasons why cost of living prices are being driven through the roof in this country is not just the cost of fuel, it's also the cost of labor. And the cost of labor has increased significantly because of the inability to find people to do the jobs. Once again, because of COVID, the numbers that died, the numbers who no longer want to work in that kind of environment, and who just changed their perspective on life. So if we can have here in Florida, take Florida for once, and say to Florida, look, get on top of our labor costs. Instead of bussing out people, find a way to have a structured immigration program where people can sell their services and come in and come back out. And these are the things that will help ease the pressure on many of our countries at home, where the level and rate of economic recovery in a post-COVID situation has not been as swift as it could be. And let me give you the other reason why. Your dollar, US dollar, has strengthened appreciably. Now, it doesn't affect Barbados in this way as much because, mercifully, we finished our debt restructuring the month before COVID came. I say, thank God, amen, thank God. But there are 50-something countries globally, of which some Caribbean countries are among them, whose cost of servicing their debt has gone up appreciably, both because of the quantitative tightening by the Fed and other global central banks across the world, but also because of the fact that in addition to the tightening, which has led to increase in interest rates, the reality is that they are not in a position to earn as they were earning before, because they're still not out of the COVID trough. So you have reduced economic activity and increased interest rates. What does that combine to do? Problems. And our fear is, how do we stop this debt crisis from morphing into a financial crisis, as happened in the late 1920s? And we should know enough to be able to avoid it, because if that happens, that's when companies and households start to feel the real pain. So bottom line is, help us to ease some pressure at the individual level by creating more opportunities for training and for jobs just in the individual states, not even at the federal level, because the one thing I've learned about up here, anything federal takes forever and monolithic. But we can do a lot more at the city. Secondly, at the federal level then is where we attack the policy issues, which I started talking about first. So policy and people. Help us carry the messages. Thank you.